Hi, good evening, and welcome to the Gin and Tonic Show. It is Friday, it is 8 p.m. UK time, it is the 10th of April, and we are fast approaching Ramadan. I'm still alone tonight, and I don't know if this will change. I have not had any feedback. So we'll see what we can do and have fun tonight. It is the Gin and Tonic Show. What we do is we talk about Islam. There is no panel to welcome today. So, what I'm saying is, hello, everybody. And there is nobody in the chat so far. I think it's Easter. I think this is having some sort of an effect. And it's very difficult for people at the moment with all this COVID, with this coronavirus pandemic all over the world. Welcome everybody who is listening to this in the archive. Welcome everybody who is doing I don't know what. If you're busy just social distancing, then that's cool. So anyway, this is the Gin and Tonic Show, and what we do is we talk about Islam. Okay, so the live broadcast, as well as any written interaction, is on YouTube and on Facebook, so you can watch it from any side. We focus on Islam because we know more about Islam than we do about other ideologies. At least this is true for me. And that is why I try and dodge everything that is outside of Islam. Now, I critique and I don't attack. This is something that I hear again and again, that I attack Muslims. I don't. Really, if somebody wants to believe a God, if somebody needs a God, I don't mind. It's up to them. I couldn't care less. It's only when Islam addresses me, the ideology, political Islam, and that is when I start pushing back. That is when I start looking at what is actually going on there. Oh, I have people in the chat. Welcome to the chat. We have Maya, we have Ahmed. Let me know when you're ready to face me. Well, I'm not going to face you. I can only talk to you here, and every single claim made, I'll deal with it here. Well, no, you can't deal with it. You can't deal with any claim that is being made in the Quran, because that is all that we are doing. So we condemn categorically any kind of abuse, any kind of oppression, any slavery, any misogyny, any kind of violence, anything. I can condemn that. I can condemn things like incest. A Muslim cannot do that because Islam condones incest. I can I can condemn any person who commits any kind of sexual activity on a 9-year-old girl. Most Muslims can't do that. So there's a lot of things that I can condemn. There's a lot of things that I can say about life today that most Muslims can't. Now, the other thing that enables me to do that is because here we embrace free speech and we embrace free expression and free criticism. And hopefully it's factual and constructive, and not what Ahmed is normally bringing up is when he's looking at individual words without thinking, because he's just addressing labels, but we will get to that a little bit later. Now, if you want to comment, question, correct, or anything, or you're just curious about anything Islam, you've come to the right place. Now, there's a lot of things that you can do. You can either come here, watch the live show, participate in the live show, either by chatting in the chat, by typing, or you can come here on the panel and talk to us here live, where today I am on my own because I don't know what Thunderous is doing. Rob has a family function, I know that. So it seems that the old traditions of Easter are still very much present in other households. In our household, we don't have that. We don't celebrate the death of a Jew who rose up apparently after a couple of days. Did you hear this one that Trump was in Jerusalem and he died of a heart attack? And the Jews said, well, we can bury him here in Jerusalem, or if you want to pay $50,000, you can send him back to New York. So they debated this for a while, and they said, well, no, we'll rather send him back to New York. And the Jews said, what, you want to pay $50,000 just to send him back to New York? Why is that? They said, well, there was a dude who died here, and then, well, he came back after 3 days, and we don't want to risk that. So anyway, we talk about Islam. We let the Quran speak for itself. We don't try and pay too much attention to secondary literature. Now, the way that Islam is normally stacked is Islam is a combination of like primary source, primary text, which is the Quran, secondary, which is the Sunnah, which comprises the sayings, the Hadith, the sayings of Muhammad, and then his life, the Sirah, the well, it's not a biography as such. It's just somebody who wrote something about a guy called Muhammad. And then you have the commentaries. So you have the exegesis, you have the textual analysis, and then you have different philosophers. And it doesn't matter whether it's an early one, I don't know, like there's so many. If you go to Ghazali or whatever, or you take a later one like Iqbal, it doesn't really matter. They There is some consensus on some contents about what it is that you find in the Quran. And that is what we're trying to get to. Don't pay us, don't go to Patreon or PayPal. Everything we do here is totally free. So what we try and do is help Muslims and non-Muslims alike to understand and handle Islam in the 21st century. We do this, we have let's say, a structure where we go and say, well, we do an introduction where we state very clearly who we are, what we're doing, what we are not, and what position we have in this. Then I bring up some news, then we have the Quran block, then the theme of the month, which this month is slavery. And then we have some discussion points. This could be a video discussion, this could be different lectures, different cards, issues, things like that. And then the live comments, and then the hadith of the day. And then if you still want to know more about Islam, then we can sit and chat on the Discord channel, where this is not going to be recorded and doesn't go public. So there we are. So one thing I want to do today, instead of a lot of news items, I just want to read a quote by somebody called Clifford, W.K. Clifford, who says, "It is wrong always, everywhere, and for anyone to believe anything upon insufficient evidence. If a man holding a belief which he was taught in childhood or persuaded afterwards keeps down and pushes away any doubts which arise about it in his mind, purposely avoids the reading of books and the company of men that call into question or discuss it, and regards as impious those questions which cannot easily be asked without disturbing it, the life of that man is one of those questions which cannot easily be asked without disturbing it. The life of that man is one long sin against mankind." And I found that very fitting. I find that extremely correct and true and appropriate to what it is that we are doing here today. All right, let's go. And because there are some, well, let's say, news items which I want to bring up, because we have a situation in India where Tablighi Jamaat had a gathering, and they didn't care that there was a pandemic. They didn't care that there was some sort of a catastrophe happening. They just wanted to spread Islam. And this became India's worst case of coronavirus. And it shows a peak in the entire coronavirus statistics, when thousands of people who are linked to this New Delhi gathering, one case in one building, caused a spike in the outbreak of coronavirus. Now, Muslims have had to look. You need to accept the reality. You can't just like totally close your eyes. Even if you're sitting in a bubble, even if you're living in a bubble, you can't completely and totally ignore reality. But this is exactly what these Muslims did. They said, well, we are protected. We are in a mosque. Allah is not going to allow a stupid little virus to come in here. Well, they're wrong. And they have to accept that there is no God who is stronger than this virus. And I don't understand why people just can't accept this. So I don't understand what India is doing, that they are not coming to grips and not being able to control the people there. Now, it's over 1 million people that you have in this country. And for some odd reason, a lot of Muslims in there just don't give a damn. Where Saudi Arabia is closing, Medina is closing, Mecca is closing everything, even though we are approaching Ramadan. I don't know what will happen during Ramadan. How many Muslims will die during Ramadan? Because the body will be so weak that if a virus finds its way into this body, that person is doomed. And it is deadly, and a lot of people simply will not accept reality. And this is weird. Here we go. What is your name today, Muhammad K? Let me just take this banner out of the way, just to see who we have today. Muhammad, killer of critics. Okay, yeah, this is a sad episode within the history of Islam. Welcome, Muhammad, killer of critics, known as the Thunder Jew, known as, I don't know, all the alliances that you've had in the last couple of weeks is amazing. Welcome.
Hi, are we live at the moment?
Yes.
Okay, hi everybody. Sorry for my tardiness. It is bank holiday weekend and I've been playing video games with my nephews. So that's why I'm late, but I'm here now. I do apologize. I apologize to the panelists and everybody. Welcome to the show.
Is that your only excuse? My goodness.
The red wine has kind of stalled me a little bit as well. So
Okay, what I'm just going through a couple of news items because what is happening in India is quite shocking. That
okay,
one incident just involving Muslims is now causing a spike in the statistics because Muslims simply refuse to accept reality that this virus cannot be stopped by just praying or by hoping that a God will protect them or by writing some sentences onto their shirts or by reciting some words or by doing all the other nonsensical things that are being propagated in the Sunnah or in whatever Islamic help pages or whatever is being propagated. It simply does not work. You cannot do
yeah.
that. And yet there are Muslims who still believe this.
But I think stops when you think about it. If you have, say, 100 Muslims that for some reason use their religion or parts of their religion, for instance, maybe a hadith or maybe a surah or maybe cutting out some page from the Quran and putting in their pocket as some kind of protection. If you have 100 that do that, statistically speaking, 100 of those men will not catch COVID, or if they did, they wouldn't die from it. I think the percentages at the moment of death are, is it 1/4 out of the 100% actually die from those that are infected. So you're looking at about 25 that die out of 100. But 75 will say it is because of this protection I took from Islam, that's why I survived. And then they will then use the statistic that the statistic is in favor of Islam because statistically speaking, more of us survived than died. And then
Yeah.
the other default is what we got through last week is it's Allah's will. Allah decides from birth how long they're going to live and when they're going to die. So if that's the case, if we recall, one of the themes I've been bringing through this chapter is when there is a situation involving death and violence, it goes back to how the chapter started, or was it this chapter or the previous one, where they were off to a war and Muhammad said, well, you should have come with us rather than stay home because it doesn't matter, you'd have died anyway. If you were going to die, if you were going to die, you would have died at home, and if you'd have come at the war, you would have died at the war anyway. So anybody who dies, if they're Muslim, would have died anyway. It just so happens Allah used COVID to kill you. And if you'd survive, you survive because Allah hadn't decreed for you to die just yet. That's the reality of Islam.
Yeah, but that's a false correlation. There's one thing that oops, there's a big feedback loop at the moment. Okay, one example that I have brought up and I'm bringing up again and again because it is so fitting. In the old days, people were petrified of solar eclipses. So what happened, I think this was somewhere in Polynesia, whenever they had an eclipse and the sun was disappearing, they quickly ran and got the drums. And then, like crazy, they were beating the drums. And they were praying to their gods and going apeshit. And then eventually the eclipse, obviously, the moon moved out of the way again, and the sun was exposed. And they said, well, you see, this is what we did because we were beating the drums. This is the reason why the sun came back. And this is exactly what this is the same example what Thunder just came up with. That it's a false correlation. It's just that you are saying, well, because I did this, then this. And that's not the case, because we know today that even if you don't beat the drums, you don't pray to the gods, the sun will come back. But in those days, the people were too afraid not to beat their drums, because every time they beat their drums, the sun came back. Okay, but the stupid thing is that in India now, you have like 5,000 or something COVID positive cases, okay? And nearly a third are related to this one religious gathering where there were thousands. There were 8,000 people who went through this building and in a matter of a week or something, and now they need to track every person where they went to see what happened to them, because the people are dying like crazy now because of this one meeting where Muslims believed that they were somehow immune to this. This is the crazy thing. The same thing in Pakistan, because there was also a gathering by this group, because this group doesn't care about people; it just cares about numbers. The more the numbers, the better the ideology. So they have 20,000 now who are being tracked because of a gathering in Lahore. So it's crazy how many Muslims at the moment are simply ignoring the dangers of corona. They are ignoring this virus because of what it says in the Quran and the Sunnah, where they believe that they are immune if they do X. Because that's what it says in the Quran, that's what it says, this is what their God is telling them, and their God, of course, can't lie. Well, I'm sorry, this God is lying. And so was Muhammad, because Muhammad said, if you do X, nothing can happen to you. But it does. So he lied to people, and people believe blindly, with blind faith, and then they die, because they believe what Muhammad said. And today is Friday, so we're going to have a lot of Muslims being infected again today, because they will simply not adhere to the instructions given to them. They will go and they will pray because they said, well, we're doing wudu, we're doing all these things. These are ancient superstitions. They are rituals. They're not. They don't have any kind of validity. So there you go. Oh, it's so sad. It's so sad. And there's report after report on this. And I don't know why people don't listen to this and don't realize what the hell is going on. So there you go. Okay. Any other comments from your side, Thunder?
I think sometimes when you're dealing with such kind of ignorance and stupidity, the ignorance and the stupidity speaks for itself, and sometimes there isn't any comment that you can make on that kind of level of behavior. It speaks volumes without anybody having to say anything.
BPA, British Pakistani Atheists, have you watched the latest EF Dawa live stream with this Subur guy? I don't know. I cannot stomach this Subur guy. He talks so much shit. I mean, there's nothing that he says that makes any sense, that has any kind of value. So whenever I see it, I just switch off. So I have seen something with him where I think he went up against Cosmic Skeptic or something, and I saw Son of Socrates going. He's so funny, it's so great. I love listening to this guy, and he makes fun of Supor, and this is I think the maximum that I can handle. He's clearly emotional mess, slightly unhinged. I agree, totally. Yeah, because the only thing that Sabur Ahmed has done successfully, as far as I'm concerned, is when he did the chicken in the Speaker's Corner. This is the only thing I have seen him do where he was successful. That was quite impressive, the way he did this for so long. I don't think a lot of people can do that. So, yeah. Oh boy.
I think
But it's quite weird that why don't people tell you, why are you going after the low hanging fruit? Why are you going for the easy guys? Why don't you go for the difficult guys? Well, guys, come on, bring us the difficult guys. Why
I was
not bring
just
the
going to say
difficult? Why
that.
not do it?
I was just going to say that because when you look at the scene of the world today of, sorry, excuse me, it's my mobile phone. Well, when you look at the scene of debates, atheism, Christianity, Judaism, Hinduism, and Islam, you find that the prominent debates are taking place between Christians and atheists. You know, you have your Richard Dawkins, your Christopher Hitchens. Well, I know he's deceased, but of the like, debating say John Lennox or William Lane Craig, and so on and so forth. So they are the heavyweight calibers of the debating world between the two lines of thought. But Islam doesn't seem to enter that equation or at that level. So when people say low hanging fruit, all Islam's debaters are at that level. There is no further forward that you can go apart from the low hanging fruit. If you really want to go high level, the best they've got is maybe Shabir Ali, or but then, and that's it. I can't think of anybody other than that. I mean, it's not as if Yasser Qadi actually debates anybody. All he does is he's an honest guy about his faith, but they don't debate. And I think they recognize the bigger the scholar, I think they recognize by watching Christians debate atheists and atheists debate Christians, that if they went in there with their own arguments, they just don't stand a chance. They can't. They don't have any, if you call it, basis for morality, spirituality, archaeology, history, any of those areas where you would think that Islam should be leading the argument. They have none. The only argument that they have is the play on words, and that's where the low-hanging fruit live. It's the play on words. I was watching Nadir Ahmed today debate a guy, a friend of David Woods. Well, it wasn't a debate; it was a discussion. But you know what Nadir Ahmed's like. He's that sloth. He debated, discussed, debate this guy, and yet again, it would have been more humane for me to sit there for an hour watching baby seals get clubbed.
Yeah.
But so when people are saying, well, why are you going for low hanging fruit? Well, name me somebody, name anybody that's better than the names that you already know. There's the challenge, and you can't.
Well, I've got a guy now who says, because I've created this meme on Facebook where I says, dear Muslims, why is it that you don't have the competence, you don't have the knowledge, you don't have this to defend the bad ideas in Islam? And then somebody came and said, well, here I am. I said, here I am what? Well, I can defend the bad ideas. Okay, well, then go ahead. Well, there are no bad ideas. Well, then why are you telling me that you can defend bad ideas if there are no bad ideas? It doesn't make sense. He says, well, if you give me a bad idea, then I will defend it. I said, yeah, but you don't even know them, and yet you say. I said, okay, let's cut to the chase. And I said to him, this and this and this and this. And I gave him a list, I think 10 or 20, I can't remember how many. And the first one, I said, well, for me, what is a bad idea is that the Quran says that a man can have 4 wives, but the wife cannot have 4 husbands. And he says, okay, well, the Quran says that you can have 4 wives, and this is for the men, and this is a command because there's a difference between men and women. And that's it. So all he does is he just gives me 1 or 2 sentences from the Quran and thinks he has now made a profound point. He has, he's really done something. He doesn't understand that you cannot go and use the Quran to verify the Quran. He doesn't understand that, and he doesn't understand that if I have a bone to pick with a bad idea within Islam, that you cannot just write or cite a sentence in the Quran to make it better. It doesn't work that way. But these people don't understand it. So I don't know what to do. Okay.
But
Yeah,
every
Sabur on the show. Sabur on the show. Look, I've actually spoken to Sabur because what they did is they used to have a show because they were copying the Gin and Tonic show. They also had this thing where you could call him, but then they controlled the microphone. You see, because they can't handle free speech or something. So they had to apply censorship as soon as it got too dicey. So I was making comments in writing in the chat, and they said, well, okay, Mr. Big Mouth, come on the show and talk to us. So I did. And then after 2 minutes, they chucked me out again because they couldn't handle it. And then Imran Hussein came and said, okay, listen, Subbu and I, we will come and we will debate you. And that was, I think, 5 years ago. And they are still not here. They're still running away. And in the beginning, I said to them, listen, okay, what's happening? When are we having this? Where's it? What's going on? And they never replied. They just blocked me on all their videos. They blocked me. Then I made reply videos. So every time, in those days, it was London Dava movement or something, or Dava London, something like this. And then it was global Dava movement. And then every time they came out with a video, like 15 hours later, I would have a response video showing where they're wrong. So this was like a game for me, and they stopped it because they realized they couldn't handle this because they couldn't refute anything. So these people are cowards. Okay, so people like Kenny Boma, I mean, he's a complete idiot, all right? He doesn't know Islam, he doesn't understand the Quran, he doesn't know what he's doing, but because he's an idiot, he goes and says, okay, I will debate you. Now, he looked like a complete fool, but he was too stupid to realize that if he's going to go into debate without being, ready for it, just with his superficial knowledge of something, he's going to be made look, stupid, and that's what happens. So
Yeah,
anyway,
but we've had this discussion before. Islam, the whole premise of Islam is based on a lie. So all you can ever do is lie. Truth doesn't defend lies any more than lies can defend the truth.
yeah,
So if you're going to defend a lie, all you have at your disposal are further lies to make that defense. And the thing is, you see, when you're looking at Islam now, they're running out of lies to tell.
yes,
So
exactly.
the fruit, in fact, rather than go up the tree, is actually coming further down the tree. I
Yeah,
mean, even children are now able to pick at this fruit. When you look at people like Nadir Ahmed and Kenny Boma, if that's the level of ability or skill in debate that you have, that should tell you something about the religion of Islam, if that's the best that you have.
crazy, eh? Yeah, honest mistake. They lost their notes. This is funny. Okay, guys, let's go and do the segment we call the Quran, where what we do, we don't go to this level of detail that we used to go to. I'm more high level now, where I just sort of skim over it and give you the Reader's Digest version. And I'm not, and I checked now. Do you know that I'm not actually allowed to call it the Reader's Digest version of the Quran? Because Reader's Digest actually have a trademark on this. So I need to call it I don't know, the condensed or whatever version, but not the Reader's Digest version.
How
Quite,
about the abbreviated version?
well, I like wordplay, so I'm going to call it the concise, condensed, critical, whatever. I'll have to think of this. There's a couple of C's I can put in there. But otherwise, yeah, that's what it is at the end of the day. All right, last week we were talking about the hypocrites and that they are in deep shit and that Muslims are not allowed to even talk to us because I guess I mock and I guess I mock the Quran because there is nothing useful in the Quran. I mean, there's nothing that is correct in the Quran. I've issued this challenge 8 years ago. Not one Muslim has been able to provide any kind of statement in the Quran that they could show that it is correct. 8 years, long time. So I mock the Quran because it's ridiculous if you read the claims of the surah like it and all the other things, and surely it would be a God. If it would not be by a God, then they would have contradictions and things like that. That's stupid. So you cannot take this seriously. But now the Muslims are told if you have somebody like me who mocks the contents, who looks at the reality of the Quran, because come on, let's face it, it was cobbled together not to be the guidebook for people because there is no guidance in there. They are like them. So if a Muslim comes and talks to me, he or she becomes like me, a hypocrite, a non-believer, and we will burn together because they
But
talk to me.
we had that conversation several years ago, didn't we? When
Yeah.
you asked me the question about what is a good Muslim, and if you can have non-believers as friends, and the implication is, as we're looking at one ayat tonight in the Quran, a Muslim cannot take an unbeliever as a friend. If he doesn't believe in Islam, then they are not friends. And if you do take a non-believer as a friend, I don't want to go too much because I don't want to spoil the show, but it starts lightly tonight, but it goes into more heavier consequences the further Islam
Yeah.
progresses.
And this is the problem. And this is why I wrote, I've read out loud the quote I read out earlier, because it's so fitting, because this is exactly what we were talking about last week. So this week, the Quran continues. We are still in chapter 4, and it's sentence 141. And if you want to go and read along, then you're welcome to do so. I've got a Quran. I cannot put two windows up. It's a pity, because because what I love doing is taking the Rashid Khalifa Quran version to to just compare it, because the Rashid Khalifa, when I say, okay, opportunist hypocrites will be judged and the believers will always win. In the Quran, the way that they translate it is that they watch you and wait. If you attain victory from God, they will say, we are not with you. But if the disbelievers get a turn, they say, did we not side with you and protect you from the believers? So God will judge between you. The day of resurrection, God will permit the disbelievers to prevail over the believers. So in other words, Muslims are always better. Muslims are the supreme group of people. And the way that I have condensed it is the opportunists and hypocrites will be judged and believers will always win. That's, in a nutshell, what I see there in this long sentence. If anybody wants to read along and comment on this, you're welcome to do so. And if there's anything that I did wrong, please go and correct me. Let me just take this thing out of the way, because this is now blocking. Okay. Sentence 142 is, hypocrites are not deceiving God, but God is deceiving them. Now, what kind of a God is that that deceives people? I mean, there's so much fakery in Islam. It starts with Jesus, where they said, no, they didn't crucify him. They were tricked into believing that they did, but they didn't. If you go to heaven, what happens? You get a virgin. Well, she's had sex with millions and billions and trillions of other men, but she has been made to seem like a virgin. So there's a lot of fakery, a lot of trickery, a lot of deceit going on in Islam. Sentence 143. Thunder, if you want to comment, just jump in, okay?
Okay.
In 43, they don't decide, and God will not guide them. So in other words, if I am somebody who criticizes the Quran because I read the Quran and I don't understand the Quran, and what I do see in there is worrying me, then this is not my fault. This is my Creator's fault, who says God will not guide me. So he created me knowing full well that I will not understand the Quran. I was created not speaking the language which was or the languages that I was brought up with are different than the one the Quran is written in, and then I am being blamed for this. I am being punished for this. Come on. And yet, Muslims are told in sentence 144, don't align with non-believers.
Right, just on that there, you see, this is the fact, because it puts it kind of mildly, but it's almost like he's sowing a seed here when it says, "Oh, you who believe, take not for friends unbelievers rather than believers." So that's kind of like if you've given the choice of taking, say, a Muslim as a friend or a kuffar as a friend. If you've got the choice, you take the Muslim as a friend, not the kuffar. So, but we know that as the Quran moves later on, it's going to kind of like narrow it down. This is like an introduction to in the society that you're living in. If you're given a choice between a Muslim and a non-Muslim, you have to go with a Muslim. That makes sense to a certain basis, because you'll only socialize with people of the same mind and of the same line of thought. I kind of get that, but it's the attitude that develops from this later on that really kind of like really is the real poison. But this is the seed of the poison that's yet to come.
Yeah. And the problem with that is you're creating your own echo chamber. You're creating your own bubble where you're not allowing anything critical inside this bubble. So you're only going to get confirmation from the same people all the time. So you're never going to hear anything different. So at the end, it's, you're being told, hang on, I forgot the name of this experiment. There's an experiment where they say, okay, there are 5 lines. Which one is the longest? And then, of course, it's number 3. So the guy says it's number 3. But then the people in front of him say, no, it's number 2. And then he gets really confused. Why are they so confident in saying it's line number 2 when actually it's line number 3? So he hesitates, and then after a while, he says it is line number 2, knowing full well it is wrong. But the peer pressure is making him say line number 2, and he starts believing this because everybody else is saying so. And there's a name for this experiment. I forgot about it. I forgot the name. And this is what is happening. A Muslim is told that Allah is the greatest, the Quran is the greatest, Muhammad is the greatest. This is the Trinity of Islam. And then I come along and I say, well, hang on, no, it isn't. But he has been brainwashed. He has been told, yes, it is the greatest, and he will believe it is the greatest. And then he looks at me with big eyes and says, how can't you see this? Of course it is there. You just need to look at it properly, and you need to believe this, and then you will understand this. But this is brainwashing. This is not the way that it actually is, but that's how it works. Okay, this is what you are doing. If you don't align with non-believers, you're only getting confirmation. In other words, other people will also tell you, yes, God, Quran, and Muhammad are the best things ever. And if you only hear this all the time, then you will believe it. So, people in some villages in Bangladesh, for example, they have never heard anything else. And all of a sudden they come to the UK or something, and they are confronted with reality, and they can't handle this. They freak. So, sentence 145, the hypocrites will burn. Now, the funny thing is, I put this bracket in here because it seems to me that in a lot of sentences in the Quran, non-believers are actually the hypocrites. Because remember, my logo actually, because I quite like this idea, says kafir. And the kafir is somebody who intentionally hides the truth. Okay, so this is somebody who is a hypocrite, who knows the truth, but goes and hides it to pretend that it doesn't exist. And this is why all of a sudden the non-believer becomes the hypocrite. Just like khamr, the covering, like the tablecloth, became wine. And there are, like in Egypt, not in every country, but the Arabic in Egypt actually has khamr now, meaning wine. So this is the evolution of language. And I think this evolution we see here, how non-believers are suddenly the hypocrites. Anyway, this is my impression. I don't know if I'm correct.
Well, my impression of the hypocrites is, yet again, going back to 144, it's those who, if you like, take friends that are non-Muslim. The Muslim who takes a kuffar as a friend, for me, in the way that I read it, he's the hypocrite, in as much that he knows what Islam is, as you've said, but he's going against it. He's not following the decree of Allah, which we know what will be said, the defining or the dividing marks come out later on. But for me, that's how I read it, because it seems to be in context with 144. But the interesting thing for me when I was reading this earlier, it says the hypocrites will be in the lowest depths of fire, no helper will you find for them. So if you're a Muslim and you're a hypocrite, you may as well eat pork. Grab yourself a beer. It's a lovely warm day. Grab yourself a beer, get a bacon sandwich. In fact, the reality is, as a hypocrite, you're in the worst place as a Muslim that's got as a kuffar, as a friend. Yeah, but having a glass of beer with a pork sandwich, because I know some people don't eat pork. I know some people who are non-Muslims that don't eat pork. So you may as well go and eat pork. All of you, have a pork sandwich, have a beer. It's a lovely warm day, because the fate is actually going to be better than if you're a Muslim hypocrite. Which is quite interesting. Muhammad is actually saying, this is where I'm saying the psychology is, he's really trying to drum it down to them, that he's trying to get that control on their mind and their behavior, and really narrowing in that they look to him for guidance as to what to do. It's almost like they can't do anything without getting confirmation from Muhammad first as to what to do and what not to do next. And the way he's reinforcing his position, and his position is getting stronger, is by the threats that he's making of what his Allah is going to do to them. Hypocrites will be in the lowest depths of the fire. No helper. Well, actually, if you're in hell, you've got no helper anyway. So I don't know, see why Allah has to put that there. because you've got no help. That's why you're there, because you've got no helper. But to find yourself in the lowest parts, that really speaks of the psychology of Allah and the messenger that he has for him. So yeah, it's a lovely warm weekend. Grab yourself a bacon sandwich.
And Donna, yeah, you didn't fool me. I thought you is childish, isn't it? Yeah, there's a lot of this childish stuff in the Quran. It's amazing, but I'm not allowed to do that. And Reanimator actually totally correct. This is the same situation as the Bible used to be in Latin, and people were not allowed to read it because people were too afraid that if the pleb would or the plebs would read it, then they would wake up to the contents of what it says there. That is why the Quran, hardly any Muslim has read it. And it's all saying, if you read the Quran, you're an atheist, but if a Muslim reads it to you, you become a Muslim because they automatically interpret it, make it look good, whitewash it, soften it, everything. But yeah.
And interesting, just going on from your there about the Bible being hidden in Latin, even when they are reading it in Arabic now you have rhetorical devices where the Arabists will then turn around and say, well, actually, this word can mean 4 or 5 or 10 different things. So if you've got a sentence of 10 words, you can have an amalgamation of 400,000 interpretations of what one sentence says,
Yes.
determining what location on planet Earth you are. If you're living in the Muslim world, you have certain types of interpretation. And if you're living in the land of the kuffar, if you're drinking from the well of the kuffar, then you have another load of interpretations. So
Yeah.
depending on where you are and which time zone you're living in determines what these verses mean to you.
And anybody can check this. All you need to do is take a sentence like 145, hypocrites will burn, blah, blah. Take the sentence, go look at the exegesis, go look at how the people who, researched and who studied Islam, who studied ancient Arabic and things like that, what they make of it, how they differ in their interpretations of just a simple sentence like this. It's amazing.
And the thing is, the further back in history you go with Islam, when you're looking at the Hadith and the tafsirs and that, these are men that are held in high esteem in Islam and have done for over 1,000 years. And now what you're finding, because people have access to information now because of the internet, because people are now a lot more savvy than they have been in the past, and people are open to having dialogue and discussion, atheists and Christians and Jews alike, with reference to the Quran. What you're finding is that this new interpretation, this new wave, is a new phenomenon. I would say, in my own past, from my own experience, from the days of Ahmad Didat, I can't find anyone earlier than him, where this new interpretation, where all of a sudden 1,000 years of Islamic history has to be thrown out the window because these guys don't know what they're talking about. But all of a sudden, 1,500 years removed from Muhammad and the first 300 or the first 3 generations of Islam, which was supposed to be the pure generation, all of a sudden they know more than what the first 3 generations do or what the tafsirs do 1,000 years ago. So you
Well,
have
that's
to
what
ask.
Ahmed is doing. This is exactly what Ahmed is doing. He's saying, I don't give a continental fart what happened 1400 years ago, how the Quran was revealed to the people and how they understood it. I want to make it something different because I am embarrassed and ashamed at what the Quran says. So I need to change it so that it appeases the people today, so that it fits into the environment today, which the Quran in its original form does not. That's it.
Yeah, it's very much really what when it's almost, they use a phrase in England, putting lipstick on a pig.
Yeah,
It's still a pig, or
exactly.
you can't rearrange it in any other way. It's like spraying air freshener on dog poo. You might fool a blind person momentarily, but sooner or later that wafty and pungent smell of excrement is going to come through, and even a blind person won't be fooled.
That's why you need these threats. That's exactly correct. You need the threats, hypocrites will burn. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense. This is why the Quran is always saying, if you're bad, if you don't do what I do, you get punished. So do what I tell you to do or else. But I am merciful. Doesn't work. It does not fit together. Anyway, 146. Those with belief will be rewarded. There you go. So the hypocrites will burn. So those who don't like me, I will punish. And those who simply believe in me will be rewarded. When I listen to Trump, I am reminded of the God in the Quran. He uses the same thing, the same arguments, the same way of talking, the same everything. This is the same narcissistic kind of attitude. I'm the best, and if you tell me that I'm the best, then I'm going to treat you well, but not. If not, then I'm going to punish you. This is exactly what the Quran does. So the Islamic God talks exactly the same nonsense as what Trump talks. So those who believe will be rewarded. And 147 is why punish you? Well, Allah does not like bad language, he said. And 49 says if you do any good openly or in secret, or pardon someone's evil, then Allah is forgiving and He is able to forgive. Funny. And those who disbelieve and either, you see, this is one of those things, nobody really knows what the Quran says. Is it those who differentiate, or is it those who sow dissent between messengers? In other words, do you differentiate between the messengers and God, or do you sow dissent between the messengers and God? Are the messengers and God one and the same thing? This is the big contention here, because messengers are said to have come to earth with the same identical message, which is nonsense. But they're still saying, yeah, it's one message, that there is one God. This is the message that the messengers were given to give to the people. There is one God, and you better do everything or else. But that's nonsense.
The thing is, Muhammad says in the Hadith, 124,000 have been sent. He's one, so that's 123,999. And I've got, I've written, well, I say an article, but a piece on it, because going back to what you did with the inheritance law, it kind of inspired me to look at Islam and the numbers game. So when you look at 123,909 prophets divided by, in Islamic parlance, from Adam all the way to Muhammad, and you get something like 2,883 prophets per generation. The reason why I'm mentioning this is because, yeah, this is it. You see, that's on the, and then if you have them living 40 years to the age of 40 years, and then another prophet takes over, so you have them concurrently, consecutively. Concurrently is at the same time, consecutively is one after the other. Then you've got Adam, the period of time between Adam and Muhammad, sort of 4.2 million years, right? Which is interesting because that will have some human beings living for several 100,000 years long when you go to the Islamic genealogy of who they have, as from Adam all the way down to Muhammad. So the numbers game here doesn't work. But the reason I bring it up is because it says there, those who deny Allah and His apostles, which is interesting because I'd asked a Muslim, what does he use? Why does he use the word apostle here? That's quite a Christian Greek thing to use. So I wonder if they actually know what the meaning of the word is. Did Muhammad understand what the meaning of the word is? And those who wish to separate Allah from His apostles, saying, "We believe in some, but reject others." See, for me, and I think we had this discussion on Sunday, was it stops, where Muhammad's being rejected, and he's almost like placing himself, or he's molding the past on himself as far as rejection is concerned. So when the Jews reject him and the Christians reject him, he's basically saying, well, yeah, but other prophets have been rejected. So being rejected is what I expect, because that's what's happened before. And one example of a prophet being rejected would be, for instance, something like Christ being rejected by the Jews. So he's putting himself in a very Christ-like position where the Jews already rejected Christ, so it should come as no surprise if you guys reject me. I'm hoping that makes sense.
He does that a lot. Yeah, we've seen.
Of course he does, but he has to. He has to, because he's molding the past on him. It's like a projection, a retrospective projection. He's taking something out of the past and he's adapting it to himself to almost like legitimize his bastardized position as a false prophet.
Exactly. And those who disbelieve and differentiate for some reason, they are the real disbelievers, and they will be punished.
There you
Those
go.
who don't will be rewarded. It's again the carrot and the stick. Asking for evidence will get you thunderstruck. And Moses is great. What is this? What kind of a book is this? Where, and we will get to this later, where the people in those days didn't even know the difference. No, didn't understand that thunder and lightning are one and the same thing. because you get thunderstruck and you get lightning. So you get lightning in the Quran doing one thing and thunder doing something else. And there is one sentence in chapter 13, and it's sentence number 13, where it actually says that that God is sending thunder to kill people. Now, thunder doesn't kill people, and the people did not know that. They thought that thunder can kill you because they have seen people get killed when they heard the thunder, but didn't realize that it was the lightning that did this. So
When, but also when you go to 153, you have to, if for those who are familiar with the Bible, he's trying to, first of all, it's interesting that he mentions only, like one of the main accounts. He doesn't mention something new or different here. He's repeating something that's already known by the Jews and the Christians, and maybe some of the people in the locale are maybe familiar with the Bible. Like, for instance, today we have atheists, evolutionists, Hindus, Sikhs, and that they don't necessarily profess to be Christian or followers of the Bible, but they'll know something of the Bible. And it's like he's mentioning something that they are familiar with, but it's more likely that's all he knows. For instance, it says that people of the book come and ask a book to descend from heaven. Well, the Jews and the Christians don't believe that the Torah or any book of the Bible is something that descended from heaven in the same way that the Muslims believe that the Quran has descended from heaven. The Jews and the Christians don't believe that, but the Muslims do believe that. This is why they always say things like, well, where's the original Bible? Where's the original? We've got the original Quran. Well, there never was an original Bible. There never was an original Torah. But he's got to, yet again, even with Allah's own word, he has to try and retrospectively put it on that what I have is no different to what has happened in the past. And it hasn't happened that way. Then it shows show us Allah in public. But there were days for their presumption with thunder and lightning, yet they worshipped the calf, even after clear signs had come to them. Even so, we forgave them. Well, first of all, who's the we? Who is the we in this context? You see, I do not believe for a moment that this is some kind of plurality in the sense of majesty, where it says we in a sense of like the Elizabethan we are not amused, the royal we. I don't believe that. I think this is where he's looked at the Bible somewhere. He's heard a story about Genesis 1:26, where it says, let us make man in our image. Now, God was obviously speaking to someone, but he doesn't know that. He thinks it's a sense of majesty or something. So I like to ask Muslims, who's the we in this context? Then it says there, forgave them. Well, anybody that knows anything about the Bible will know about 30,000 were not forgiven for when they made the golden calf. So he's got that historically wrong.
Well, the funny thing is that he refers to this now, but it's in the middle of the sentence, there is a change in topic. So asking for evidence will get you, whatever, punished. And then instead of now starting a new chapter, which is about Moses, let's talk about Moses now. In the middle of the sentence, it changes completely from getting evidence to Moses. In the middle of the sentence, just like that, suddenly Moses is great. And then it talks about this. It's one of the, 39 times that it talks about the Moses story where they go to a mountain. So walk about over. Now, this is a lot of times where Muslims say, well, you see, this is the way that they used to pray in the old days. So everybody used to be a Muslim. Well, no, they didn't. They were just walking this way, the way that you walked when you were worshiping a king or when you were submitting to a king, that you were on your knees and you were walking about over. And they say, Moses is great. They got a mountain on top. So Mount Sinai was, I don't know, I don't understand the Quran. They got a mountain. Because I think if I remember correctly, it says over their covenant or something, a mountain was raised or something like this. I can't remember. They got it. Anyway, and keep the Sabbath.
Can I just mention on that as well? 153 he talks about indeed they asked Moses for a greater miracle. Got to bear that in mind, because you see, Muhammad is setting himself up here as something else, because they did get the miracles and it made no difference to them. He later on is going to be asked, why don't you have miracles? So the audience should have that in their mind, because the miracle thing is going to be brought up later on in the Quran, and there's a reason for this being mentioned now.
The same with the keep the Sabbath. This is going to be mentioned several times again. The naughty Jews who don't keep the Sabbath. They didn't. And they killed prophets, which they didn't, but whatever. So Allah sealed their hearts. Now we know that this is metaphorical, okay? We know that they thought that people are thinking with their hearts and the brain is just for cooling the body. So yeah, we just need to take that. So sealing the hearts just simply means that they did not know what was going on because intentionally their God said, no, you're not allowed to know this. So he's keeping information from the people for not believing and lying about Mary. Come on. Lying about Mary. I mean, this is the story because Muhammad misunderstood Mary. Okay. Number one, he thought Mary was father, mother, and son was the Trinity. And he thought that Mary, the sister of Aaron and daughter of Imran and blah, 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 was 1,000 years earlier, 1,200 years earlier. So there's a lot of anachronism here on top of everything else. And then lying about Mary because they made this thing that Mary was unfaithful because they did the same thing. And this is why Aisha was so young and so, also sculpted around Mary. So they lied about Mary that she was unfaithful when in reality it was a it was a messenger of God, an angel, who went and blew into her whatever, and then this got her pregnant. So not quite understanding the way that Mary was being painted or something in the Bible. And then they said, this is what I was talking about earlier. They said they killed Isa or Jesus, which they didn't, but they were made to assume, but they didn't. So this is not me. This is what the Quran says, which they didn't, but assume it, but didn't. So it goes backwards, a couple of times, just to make sure that people understand that they were being deceived by this God.
I know that there is some that challenge whether even Jesus existed, but I'm not even going to go down that road at the moment. Let's just go with the narrative of the implication here of what this verse is saying as well, that they did not kill Jesus. So let's look at it historically, because Christianity is a very real religion. It did start in the 1st century and it's still in existence today. And the whole point of Christianity is that Jesus came and he died. If that be the case, then Allah is the creator of Christianity, the very religion that he can't stand. So the religion he can't stand is the religion that he created in the first place. And it's all based on a deception that he created. So the Christianity, the Christian faith is a fake faith based on a lie that was set up by Allah. And now if Allah knows all things, then Allah would have known that he was going to set up a fake religion in opposition to what his own religion is. So I don't understand why Allah would do that, knowing what the implication was when he killed some. And then who was the person that died? I mean, don't get me wrong, but let's look at who killed Jesus. It was the Romans under the behest of the Jews. Now, these were professional killers. It's not as if that they never executed somebody. It's not their first time of execution. They would have known how to execute people. Hence, the execution that took place with Jesus. They scourged him first. So these are people that were familiar with his features, his face, and all of the markings as well. So who could have been that person on the stake that was replaced by Allah and so that it wasn't Jesus? So that would mean that Jesus wasn't brutalized before his execution. The other person was. So who was the other person? Why is the other person not mentioned? And why did Allah kill that person? What did that person do for Allah to deceive the world by executing him?
Well, the Muslims say it's in the Bible that it was Simon who offered to take the cross part of the way, if I remember correctly. And
No, Joseph of Arimathea. He offered that offer to carry it is not saying, "I will take your place." And
well,
even if
this is what they're saying. I don't want to start an argument. This is just what I've heard people say. So
it's
not
the
important.
implication. No, of
It's
course
not
it's not.
important. What is important here is that we are being tricked into believing something that didn't take place. So God quite openly says, well, I am the deceiver here. I'm making it look as though. So there's a lot of trickery going on here. And it doesn't really matter who, when, where, how. What the point is that this God is being worshipped, but he is a tricker. It's fake.
Yes, and the point I'm trying to make is that he's going to be blaming people for worshipping somebody or being a part of a faith that he set up.
And then this Jesus or Isa or whatever, unlike all the other messengers, was, I don't understand what this means, raised to this Allah. He was raised to him. He raised him to himself. I think metaphorically, or this picture that they used to have, like from the Greek gods and the Roman gods, is that there is somebody sitting above the clouds, and then if you are raised, this is like a beam that is picking you up and taking you up into the sky, so that you are then sitting next to this God or near this God. But God doesn't really exist as a as a constrained space. So I don't understand. This is total nonsense what it says here, that it was raised to this Allah. I don't understand how this works. If this Allah is outside of this universe, you can't be raised. There is no up or down in the universe. So this is like a childish concept, that if you look up, you can look towards the sky, towards heaven. If you look down, you're looking towards hell or something. So it's quite strange. Anyway, then the book people. Now again, it's unclear. Who are we talking about? Are the book people the Jews? Are the book people the Christians? Or is it Jews and Christians? We don't know. So the book people will believe in him for sure, in this Jesus, and this Jesus will judge them. But it's not only the book people who are going to be judged by Jesus. Everybody will be. So I don't understand what the Quran is saying. It's giving misinformation here. Then it says we prohibited some stuff for bad Jews, like charging interest. And this results in torture, because he's got this, I don't know, this paranoia about charging interest, where the Islamic banking system is doing the same thing. It calls it a fee based on the level of input or output or whatever, how much you're borrowing or how much you're putting in. So it's the same thing. It's just called something different. So there's no big deal here. I don't know why so many Muslims are so dependent on labels. Just because you label something different, but still do the same thing, it doesn't change it. And of
Because
course we know this.
it makes them feel as though they've got the high moral ground. That's
Yeah,
why.
but they don't. I mean, come on, it's 2020. We know these things.
We know
And
these things. You know these things. The world knows these things. But for the Muslim that's repeating it, he has to say that because it gives him a sense of moral high ground. That's why he has to say it.
and then, of course, you get the usual thing in the Quran. You're going to be tortured, but the good ones, the believers, they will be rewarded. So it's the same thing over and over. Those who don't do, punished. Those who do, reward. So it's always the same message that we get in the Quran. Okay, anything else? Any comments? Have you been looking at the chat? Because I've sort of glanced, but haven't been able to do anything.
I've been looking at it. Thinking clearly makes a good point. I do love how Dawa Muslims always say they show respect to Christianity as they teach about Jesus, even though they completely change the story. Absolutely thinking, when I talk to Muslims, I say, I don't know which Jesus you're talking about because it's not the Jesus I know. That's the way I control the language
And
of them.
there's several factors here, because it says here that he was not crucified because he was just a messenger. And then it says, well, he was a messenger just like all the other messengers. And we've come across the sentences before which say, look, all the messengers were treated the same way. There is no differentiation between the messengers. And yet here, Jesus is raised to this Allah already. None of the other messengers, not even Muhammad, got this kind of VIP treatment.
Yeah, but none of them were born of a virgin. None of them had, well, most of them didn't have miracles. And only Jesus was the one that wasn't touched by Satan in the womb. All the other ones were. So there are so many things that separate Jesus apart, even in Islamic parlance. Though I don't know which Jesus they're talking about. It's certainly not the one I know.
Yeah. Quite weird. Okay, that was the segment on the Quran. what we're going to do now is we're going to go to the segment on the theme of the month, which is slavery and Islam. Now, last week, what we did is we said, okay, let's take a look at the introduction, let's take a look at what slavery is, and blah, blah, blah. And what I want to do today is go a little bit deeper, go look at the actual words, because we had Ahmed telling us, well, this doesn't really mean what it says it means, and he got something different. And I want to shed some light on this and come to terms with what it actually says in the Quran, because we went through a couple of sentences in the Quran, and I want to do this some more. And what I did is I found a place, because slavery, actually, we have different kinds of slavery, all right? And what I found, and this document is growing. Last week it was 60, now it's already 75 pages, that there are 5 recognized forms of slavery. And I need to find them. I don't know where I put them, and I cannot find the heading under which we'll just have to go through them. We'll find them along the way. So what I want to do is we started going through a couple of sentences in the Quran. And what I want to do today is I want to continue through some sentences and then see how these sentences are being changed at the time, like 1,000 years ago, how they are being twisted today by different people who, with different intentions, who either want to whitewash it or want to confirm it. So you have both types of people. And this is what I want to show today. So if we go to chapter 4, and we did this like a couple of months ago. Actually, no, this is where we ended 2019. Chapter 4, 22 to 25. Because this was horrific, how people were actually defending the concept of slavery, the concept of sex slavery in the Quran. So in 422, we get to this: marry not the women whom your fathers married, except what is already passed. So we did this, all right? So people who were married at the time to their fathers' wives, this was okay. But now Islam comes around, this God changes its mind and says, no, it's no longer okay. So if you did this in the past, well, you can keep your wives, but don't do this again. The people can marry their sons' wives, but the sons can no longer marry their father's wives. They're not allowed to do that anymore. And then there's a list in 423 which tells you what is forbidden for a man. It's always the man's point of view to marry. So forbidden is your mother, your daughter. Well, unless it's your illegal daughter, then you're allowed to marry your daughter. Your sister, your paternal aunts, your suckle dada, dida, dida, da. What is not in here is the cousin. Because in Islam, you cannot go and say, I condemn incest, because you are allowed to marry your cousins. And this is a huge problem in some communities. Now, if I go and I have sex with my cousin, which, again, I condemn, all right? I do not condone incest. I do not think that it is okay for siblings or family members amongst each other to have sex. I think this is wrong for various reasons. I don't think it should be criminalized. I don't think that it is my duty to go and report somebody. If brother and sister have sex, it's up to them. If they are using protection and there's no offspring. So it shouldn't be criminalized, but I still condemn it, okay? I don't personally condone it. Now, I do not condone having sex with your cousin, but if I do, and she should fall pregnant, it's not a guarantee. It's not 100% sure that the child is going to be disfigured in any way. There's just a high chance that if this continues over 2 or 3 or 4 generations, then it is guaranteed that you are going to have genetic defects. And this is the reason. This is the from natural thinking, from an evolutionary point of view. This is why it should definitely be prohibited to have sex, to have offspring between cousins. And we have huge problems in some pockets in Islam and in some communities where Muslims are practicing this cousin marriage for several generations, and then this causes problems.
And it's also a problem on the local health system as well. So the
Yeah.
burden is disproportionate on local communities and the local care systems that are in those communities.
And then it carries on in 424. What is forbidden is married women. So you're not allowed to have sex with another married woman. So adultery is a taboo in Islam, except, and this is a big except, and this is now where this expression is being used, this mamalakat aymanukum, those whom your right hands possess. So you are not allowed to have sex with a married woman except if she is your sex slave. Now, what people are saying is this famalakat aymanukum is not really a sex slave. This is just a worker. This is just somebody who is under your oath. This is just somebody that you are responsible for. But then the funny thing is they go and they argue about the label where ma malakat aymanukum, those whom your right hands possesses, is not actually those whom your right hands possesses. It is something else. But they don't change what happens with these people. Because you can't change the entire Quran now. You can go and you can say, well, this expression means something else, but at the end of the day, you can still have sex with them, even if they are married. So this doesn't make it any better. And the analogy would be, if I go and I criticize, I don't know, the gear lever, this stalk of a BMW, and I say, okay, this is now all of a sudden I am insulting all BMW drivers. No, I'm not. I'm talking about one specific car and I'm talking about one specific item. So this is a bad idea in a car. Now I'm saying I like cars, but not this one single incident. So they're saying, well, actually, this is not car because you are now talking about a BMW, so you can't change the word BMW for car. But the car is still the same thing. It is still a transportation device for something, whether it be people or whatever, food or cargo or whatever. Doesn't matter. It's still the same thing what you do with the car. So if I go and I say I am criticizing one item in one of the cars, then this is all that I am doing. I'm complaining about the concept within something in something bigger. And now to say, well, we need to change the word because the word car is wrong. You need to change it into transportation device. It doesn't matter what I call it at the end of the day. It is still a gear selector within a car. So it doesn't matter what you call it. And this is where Maverick, and I see he's commenting already. Why is there no Muslim in this channel of supposed criticism? Lol. Supposed criticism. This is not supposed criticism. I am criticizing slavery. I am very much against slavery. And why is there no Muslim? Well, you're the only Muslim, and all you're doing is changing the words, but you're not thinking. You see, what you are doing is you're being a primitive child who says, I don't want to call it that name. I wanted to call it something else. It doesn't matter what you call it. It's what happens with this that is important. And he's saying, except the married women who left their pagan husbands as per 6010. It doesn't say this here. It doesn't say here the married women who left their pagan husbands. If this God wants to be clear who the married women are that you can have sex with without even consulting them, then it should be clear and telling me what this is. Here in the Quran, it says that forbidden are married women except those whom your right hands possess. So in other words, the slave girls who are married, whom you can buy, who are being given to you as presents, who, I don't know, you captured, you did whatever, those are the ones that you can have sex with. It's not going to make it better.
it says a lot. Just looking at that as well, something comes to my mind that Islam has no regard for marriage. You know, the sanctity of marriage, as it were, in previous religions by the other 123,999 prophets. Marriage is quite a serious thing. It's not to be taken lightly, and it's not one to be mocked. I mean, from the 123,999 previous prophets, okay, it's a God ordained arrangement. Yet Islam treats it as nothing. You know, the Maverick turns around and says they left their pagan husbands. What, they didn't divorce them then? They just left them. They just walked out, and for what? What, because one other man was spouting a better religion? What does it say about these women, even if that account is true, then? That they would walk away from their husbands and their marriage arrangement and their family because another man came along in the local community or another community espousing another message. That we really have to ask the intelligence of the women. Why would you follow such a man as well, considering the nature of women in that community post-Islam and pre-Islam and post-Islam?
And Thunder, do you want to bet if I go to chapter 60 now, I am not going to find there whatever sentence or whatever information you find in 424 is to be taken to refer only to pagan women who left their husbands. I'm not going to find that there. I'm going to find some other information because it's not going to say, or it's not going to clarify what I find in 424. So the contents of the Quran is that you are allowed to have sex with married women if they are your bondwomen, the ones that your right hands possess, your slave girls. That is the information. You don't like me using the word slave girl or sex slave. Well, then talk to your God to change it.
And
Go talk to your God to bring an updated Quran that is valid for today. Go and talk to your all-powerful, all-merciful, all-knowing God to bloody well go and change it to make sense for the people today.
well, Muslims can't do that because when they're talking to their God, they've got a prescripted transcript that they've got to repeat parafasha 5 times a day. Within that namaz, there isn't any room for asking questions like that. So he's not going to be able to do that. What he might want to do, though, and I encourage all Muslims living in the Western world drinking from the Western water pool, because obviously the water pool in their own countries isn't good enough. Why don't you speak to the scholars for dollars that are in Saudi Arabia, like Asim Halakim, who's prominent on Peace TV, a channel set up by Zakir or Faker Nike? Why do you ask them that they agree with the Kuffar's understanding of what the slave means? And you Muslims living in the West, drinking from the Western pool, water pool, you're saying something completely different. So Allah says it in one way, Muhammad says it in one way, the first 3 generations of Islam say it the same way, the tafsirs say it that way, the Hadith confirms it's that way, 1,000 years of Islamic history says it's that way, your scholars for dollars living in Muslim-controlled countries say it's that way, the kuffar that have got access to the information, they say it's that way, but the only people that disagree are Muslims living in the Western world. Can anybody see a pattern emerging yet?
Yeah. And on top of everything else, people go and look at what happens, not at the label in front. Go and look behind the label. Because it just continues. Sorry, yeah?
I was just going to say, no, you carry on, because I was going to ask a question and I don't want to preempt anything that you might be saying. Sorry, forgive me.
Because if I want to just carry on, because it says Allah's ordinance to you, lawful for you besides these, provided that you seek with your property and taking and blah, 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 then as to those whom you profit by, in other words, send into prostitution, then give them their dowry as appointed. And there is no blame on you what you agree after what is appointed. So you can do with them whatever you want. And Allah is knowing and wise. Yeah, like ever. And whoever among you has not within his power ampleness by means to marry. And this is now, look behind the label. Whoever among you has not within his power ampleness, in other words, who's too poor to marry a free believing woman, because he needs to pay for this, then he may marry of, again, ma malakat ay ma nukum, then he can marry those girls, these sex slaves, from among your believing maidens. And Allah knows best your faith, you husband knows. So marry them. And now this is the funny thing. We're talking about the sex slaves. And it says, marry them with the permission of their masters, and give them their dowries justly, being chaste, not fornicating, and so forth. So you're supposed to, if you're too poor to give like $10,000 to the father of a woman that you like because she's a free Muslim, then you just go and give her like $10, and then you can marry her, and then you can divorce her again, or you can stay married, whatever you want, but you can have sex with her, because this marriage is a euphemism for having sex. Okay, then he may marry or have sex with these sex slaves with the permission of their master. So these women are slave girls, and you need to ask the master, listen, can I marry this girl? And then you give the master $10 or something, and then you can take them away, you can marry them. Because it's a financial transaction. So there you go. And there's several places like this in the Quran. But then, and here, this is nice, okay, because and I said this last time already, because there are instances where the Quran actually improves the situation of slaves because it regulates it. Before it wasn't. The Romans were incredibly brutal, so they could do with the slaves what they wanted. I mean, if you read the Bible, and I think Thunder will know this, what you see there about the treatment, you can beat them, but as long as they don't die within 3 days, you're good to go. So
I don't
this is
know
what the
where
Romans were practicing.
I don't know where that's in the Bible, not the Bible I read, because the God of the Bible keeps reminding people that you were once slaves yourself. So I'd like to see that reference.
Yeah, it's 100%. If they don't die within 3 days, you're good to go.
Well, you just need to show me
Even
that reference. I've never
okay, it
read
doesn't
that.
matter, but it's in the Bible. I'm sure of that.
Well,
And
you
this
need
is
to
what the
provide a reference.
people were doing at the time. And then Islam came and said, well, no, don't really do that. And they came out with Sentence 36 in chapter 4. Do good to parents, kinfolks, orphans, those in need, neighbors who are near, neighbors who are strangers, the companion by your side, the wayfarer, and what your right hand possesses. Okay, so don't treat them badly just like that, but try and be good to them. Yes, you paid a lot of money. I mean, it's like a slave is like a toaster. Okay, so you go and buy a toaster, but you clean the toaster, you empty it, you maintain it, and by maintaining the toaster, you are maintaining the value so that it has a purpose that you need it for. And the same is true for the slaves. And the slaves need to be maintained, so they need to be dressed, they need to be fed, they need to, because otherwise, if they die, you have paid a lot of money for something that is just being, that you lose due to your own neglect. So it says, treat slaves well. And that's good. I mean, it's not treating them badly all the time and just sort of running them into the ground or something, but actually treating them well. And this is good.
But that's because there are financial investments as well at the same
Yes,
time.
of course. I mean, that's what you find in the Quran all the time. We heard this before, that freeing a slave I mean, Islam never came around to free the slaves. Freeing a slave was a punishment because it was a financial burden. And we saw last time that the equivalent of freeing a slave is 2 months of fasting.
Yeah.
So there's not a lot of sympathy lost there. So if you go to chapter 8 and you read sentence 70, it says, O Prophet, say to those who are the captives in your hands. And now we see there's a difference in words. So it doesn't always use the word those who your right hand possess. It doesn't use abd as slave, but it uses captives in your hands. If Allah find you in good hearts, He will give you something better than which He has taken from you, and He will forgive you. So say to those who are captives, right? So in other words, this is God now talking to the slaves and saying, if He finds anything good in your hearts, He will treat you as something better in the future. But not today as a slave. Today you need to work. This is what Jesus says in the New Testament as well. Slaves, obey your masters, and you will be rewarded in heaven accordingly. And this is the same message that was copied into the Quran. So Muhammad was a great taker of slaves, okay, we know that. And he promises the slaves a better life in paradise. That's the way. Now, in chapter 12 of the Quran, this is another piece of, well, I call it evidence because it says here, they sold him for a miserable price, for a few dirhams counted out. In such low estimation did they hold him. So in other words, the Quran says that somebody can be sold, a person can be sold, a person can be bought, a person can be bartered, a person can be inherited, can be treated like an object, like a toaster. And this is the problem. And you cannot get around this. You cannot get around the sentences. It doesn't matter how much you work on the labels. It's just a label. But what goes on behind the label, you can't change everything. Okay, permission of your master stops. You are so desperate you're lying. Yeah, okay, talk to your God. This is what your God says in the Quran. I can't help it. It's not me lying. Go to the Quran. He's lying to you. Where did he get master from? Well, it's from the Quran. I thought that was the Quran. Yes, that's exactly. Levi, you're repping your Lessie crew. Okay, I don't know what the fuck this is. I think he's drunk. Maverick, are you drunk? What are you drinking? Desperate. No, I'm not desperate. I would love for this to have a different contents. I would love for this to say, listen, treat everybody well. Do not own another human being. I would love for it to say that, but it doesn't. So this becomes one of the very, very bad ideas in Islam, this slavery thing, and you cannot get around it. So it's not that I am desperate. You are the one who desperately is trying to make it look better than it is. Now, I'm just giving you examples. I'm giving you example after example.
Will we be touching on what's the theme of the slavery you're going with this evening? Is it with reference to the sex slaves?
Now, I'm going to go now. It is already past. Okay, so I'm going to skip a couple because it says slave under dominion of another, a man, because these are all examples of where you go and look behind the scenes, behind the label. Okay? And it says here, a man on whom we have bestowed goodly favors. Are the two equal? No. So the slave is not the same as the master. And the man he has to guard his modesty. In other words, a woman cannot show her ornaments, in other words, her boobs and blah, 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 and the man cannot run around, we call it kalkhat, with a naked bum, except from their wives, so you can be naked with the wife, or the slaves that their right hands possess. So if they are employees, or if they under some oath, or if they are under my guard or whatever, why should a woman run around naked in front of in front of a slave the same way as she runs around in front of her husband? Or why should the man run around in front of the female slave the same way as he's running around in front of his wife? Because he can have sex with them. That's why there is no value assigned to a slave. This is why you don't have to care. And this is the problem, that the Quran says the slave is not like the master, and that you don't have to worry about being naked in front of a slave. And 24:30. Sorry, I'm talking about. Tell the believing women to lower their gaze and be modest, and to display of their adornment only that which is apparent, and draw their veils over their bosoms, not to reveal their adornment, save to their own husbands or fathers or husbands' fathers or their sons or their husbands, or their slaves. And this is in the Quran, chapter 24, sentence number 31. This is the same thing what we saw earlier in chapter 23. You can walk around in front of your slaves how you want to. The same is in chapter 23. It's repeated. So the Quran tells us again and again, there is no value assigned to a slave. You don't have to be modest. You can just do whatever you want with them. and 24. A couple of sentences later, sentence number 58. You believe, let your slaves and those of you who have not come to puberty ask leave of them at 3 times. In other words, if you walk into something, into somebody else's place, you need to ask them if you are allowed to do that, unless they're your slaves. And in chapter 33, Allah repulsed the disbelievers. In their wrath they gain no good. Allah averted the attack from the believers. Allah is ever strong, mighty, and He brought those of the people of the scripture who supported them down from their strongholds and cast panic into their hearts. Some He slew, and He made captive some. In other words, this is how you get slaves. You make captives. So the Quran explicitly allows you to take captives and then use them as slaves. And a couple of sentences later, we made lawful unto thee thy wives, unto whom thou hast paid the dowries, and those whom thy right hand possesses, of those whom Allah has granted thee as spoils of war. The same idea again. If there's a war or something, you can just take them as though they were a toaster that you have conquered, and you can then use them as you want. And this, I mean, it doesn't matter which translation. I've got, I don't know how many translations here. They all say the same thing. We have made lawful to you your wives, whom you have given their bridal money, and whom you rightfully possess from those Allah has given to you. So God has given to you captives, and they are lawful to you. In other words, you can have sex with them. The same way as you can have 4 wives and an unlimited number of those that Allah has given to you. That's what it says here in 3350. And it doesn't matter which translation you want. The right hand spoils of war is given the right hand possessors of the prisoners of war whom Allah has signed to you. Your right hand possessors of whatever spoils of war that Allah has given to you. Right hand possessors have given you spoils of war. So it doesn't matter which translation you take. They always say the same thing. And in 33 it also says, it is no sin for the wives to converse freely with their fathers, their sons, their brothers, or their slaves. So a commentary says that Quranic institution had some unique new features. And according to Brokop, the idea of using arms for the manumission of slaves who had converted to Islam appears to be unique to the Quran. Okay, so this is something new. Other scholars state that Quran does not condemn prostitution, and both male and female prostitution has been practiced throughout Islamic history. So there's 2 pieces of information here, that you can use money to free slaves if they first convert to Islam. Right? Not just anybody, but if they do convert to Islam, because normally you can't. In the Quran says you cannot simply free a slave even if they convert. But if they do, it gives you the possibility to also pay money. In other words, the investment that somebody made, you can pay them back for this, and then they can free them. So this is possible. And there are, I don't know how many chapters in Bukhari and in Muslim where they actually, and it's in the jurisprudence, in the fiqh as well, how many different rules and laws there are regarding the freeing of slaves. Because you can, like a toaster, several people can own the toaster. And then if somebody gets rid of the toaster and sells his portion, the others can buy this, or if they don't want the toaster anymore, they can let it free. But now, because it's a free toaster running around, people are going to say, oh, I want a toaster. And now how do you stop the people from re-enslaving this freed person? So this is a huge problem which covers many, many chapters in Islamic jurisprudence, how to handle the slaves. Now, Brokop also states that the Quran was a progressive legislation on slavery in its time because it encouraged proper treatment. And this is what we've just seen. Others state that Islam's record with slavery has been mixed, progressive in Arabian lands, but it increased slavery and worsened abuse as Muslim armies attacked people in Africa, Europe, and Asia. And another historian, Murray, notes that the Quran sanctioned the institution of slavery and abuses therein, but to its credit, did not freeze the status of a slave and allowed a means to a slave's manumission in some cases when the slave converted to Islam. Now, this is where I am at the moment, okay? I'm going a little bit deeper into this, and I'm now going into academia. So this is now the Gutenberg, I don't know if you know the Gutenberg project, where they're taking old texts and they're making them available to the public. And this is from Gutenberg or articles, English, and this is about Ma Malakat Aymanukum, where they explain all these words. And everybody can see this because this article was sourced from Creative Commons Attribution Share Alike license. So this is now a project where articles such as this are being made, free to the public, and anybody can go and read them. You just need to find them. And this is what I'm doing at the moment. I'm trying to go deeper into this so that I get more information. Now, this Mamalakat Aymanukum, okay, what New Age Islam is a web page, okay? So what they are saying is in the Quran, the word abd is used for male servant and amma is used for the female servant. So when the Quran wants to specify any one of them, it uses specific words. But when it speaks of both, it uses the phrase Mamalakut Aymanukum and leaves it to the reader to understand the meaning according to the context. Okay, so this is very important information. This expression, this is what I was trying to explain earlier with the analogy of it's a people transportation device or car. It depends on, a car can be anything. A car can be used to transport cargo or people or animals or whatever. It's up to the context. And this is the same thing with Mamalakut Aymanukum. It's what the right hand possesses. It depends what you do with them. And this is the good part of Islam, that it tells you to treat people well, but at the same time, it does not stop abuse. And at the same time, it allows you to use them as sex slaves. And this is the negative part. So what New Age Islam says, the phrase Mamalakut Aymanukum has been used in the Quran on a number of occasions and translated as the possession of their hands, and female slaves are meant by it, though the phrase is gender neutral. And male slaves are also meant according to the context, or can be meant according to the context. And Mamalakut Aymanukum min fatayukum al-muminat, it means young girls among your captives or slaves. So there's a specification here. This also shows that Mamalakut Aymanukum is gender neutral and only means slaves or female slaves, depending on the context. And then it takes the 424 that we just talked as an example, prohibited of women already married, except those whom your right hands possesses. In this context, whom your right hands possess does not mean only female slaves, but also prisoners of war among women. So they can be married, even if they are prisoners of war, you are allowed to have sex with them. And they use also another example that we've just used, not to display the adornment, except before their husbands, 2431, to show how this expression is being used to specify female slaves. So you can't get, just by changing the label, it does not change the context. And Islam says here, obviously here, slave means male slaves and those people incapable of sex desire. In other words, castrated men. And it becomes clear that the phrase Mamalakut Aymanukum is not only used to mean female slaves, but is a gender-neutral phrase meaning both male and female slaves, depending on the context. Also, on some occasions, it is also used to mean prisoners of war or women taken as war booty or male prisoners of war or servants or captives. So this is the general term car. And it doesn't matter what kind of a car, whether it's a convertible or a station wagon or whatever. Now, this is the classic understanding. The modern realignment then says the concubine, the sex slave concept, is against the Quran. The great book, Al-Quran, never discusses slave or sex slaves or personal private parts. Orthodox wrongly interpreted, following verses to justify sex slavery. And then they come up with exactly the ones like 23.5 and 70.29 have the same meaning. Therefore, translation of 23.5 are given under certainly will mean that the safety security have succeeded. or they who guard for their flaws or shortcomings, or except from their group mate or those who are under their oath, for indeed they will not be blamed. The problem what they're doing here is they're taking just this is quote mining at its best, okay? Because they're taking some parts of the sentence without showing the context, without showing what you are allowed to do with them. So what they're just trying to do is whitewash this. So they're saying as far as verses 33, 50, 424, those are the ones we just went through, are concerned here. Malakot amanakum and malakot b'yamika also means the groups under your oath. In these verses, the agreement or contract between the head of a state and different groups is being described. Okay. Remember, Al-Quran never allows slaves or sex slaves through nikah or without, nor this great book discusses personal private parts and sex. And they just reassert this. The Mu'min, a safety, security, peace provider. The Furj is a rift or shortcoming. Malakot Aimonikum means people under your oath. And Azvaijuhum is their group mate. And it suddenly becomes servitude or another form of employment. And that's it. And it's just changing the label, not the contents. Okay, modern reaffirmation, this is the opposite, says that where Sheikh Al-Fawzan, a member of the Senior Council of Clerics, which is Saudi Arabia's highest religious body, and he's a member of the Council of Religious Edicts and Research, the Imam of Prince Mitaib Mosque in Riyadh, and professor at Imam Mohammed bin Saud Islamic University, the main Wahhabi center of learning. He says slavery is part of Islam. Slavery is part of jihad, and jihad will remain as long as there is Islam. And he attacked Muslim scholars who say otherwise, maintaining they are infidels and ignorant, not scholars. And the American journalist, John Miller, said, it's hard to imagine a serious person calling for America to enslave its enemies. Yet a prominent Saudi cleric, Sheikh Saud al-Baraik, recently urged Palestinians to do exactly that with Jews. And they said, this is what the Palestinians, the Gaza people said, their women are yours to take legitimately. God made them yours. Why don't you enslave their women? Modern criticism, just to have all three sides in this, a Saudi cleric issued a fatwa permitting sex slavery. He said, praise be to Allah, Islam allows a man to have intercourse with his slave woman, whether he has a wife or wives, or he is not married. Our Prophet also, and he says, peace and blessings, blah, 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 also did that, as did the Sahaba, his companions, the righteous and the scholars. And he says in the 8th century, when Arab armies invaded India, they took thousands of Hindu prisoners of war, and they took them as slaves, and they took them back to Caliph Walid in Damascus, who distributed the women as gifts to the newly emerging Arab nobility. The 9th century Persian historian Al-Baraduri writes in his book, The Origins of Islamic State, that when the Arab general Muhammad bin Qasim invaded India in the year 711, the non-Muslim prisoners were taken and were given a choice of death or slavery. 60,000 captives were made slaves in the city of Ruhr, among whom were 30 ladies of royal blood. Why am I getting this funny noise from you?
I don't know.
Do you have a frog next to the microphone?
No, I'm faffing about with the television. Sorry, I'll stop.
Oh, that's the 19th century Indian Islamic scholar Abdullah Yusuf Ali, whose translation of the Quran is considered the most authentic, had the courage to be honest when he put a footnote to the Quranic verse mentioned above. The point does now arise as the whole conditions and incidents of war have been altered and slavery has been abolished by international agreement. But courage to face the facts is rare among many Muslims today. I asked the writers, and this is still the quote from the guy, okay? I asked the writers of the Toronto Star and the Independent columns why they had not addressed the passages of the Quran that permit Muslims to take slaves. They did not answer. I wrote to a woman who told Christian Amanpour of CNN, Boko Haram do not understand Islam, and I asked her why she had not addressed Sharia that permits taking non-Muslim females as prisoners of war. She too did not respond. We
That's
Muslims are caught in a conundrum. If the Arab general bin Qasim is our hero for enslaving non-Muslim women in India in the 8th century, how could Boko Haram be judged wrong for doing exactly the same in Nigeria today? And this Muslim continues, all we Muslims need to do today is to echo Abdullah Yusuf Ali by saying what was permitted in the 7th century is no longer applicable in the 21st. But alas, neither honesty nor courage comes easy.
See, this is it where time and again during the show over the past few years, where the phrase is the Quran and the Hadith define Islam, not Muhammad, or sorry, the Quran and Hadith define Islam, not Muslims. And you're talking about cowardice there, but the cowardice is also on the part of Muslims not being honest in the Western world.
This was a Muslim, exactly. This was a Muslim who wrote this.
Yeah, and also there's also cowardice on the part of people in authority, like through the media, CNNs and Fox News and such, that are also, or should be, if they're reporters, should be aware of the mechanism of Islam and falsely reporting on it. You know, always portraying it as being this kind, benevolent, peaceful religion when 1,400 years of history teaches something completely different.
And this is something that I'm going to go and in the last episode, because I'm getting now into the different. Okay, what I'm doing is I'm trying to establish what is slavery, right? Then I'm trying to establish what is the slavery mentioned in Islam. This is where we are now. Then what I'm going to do is how did slavery actually happen? In other words, how did the people, the slaves, actually make it into the Islamic world? And then what are the differences between the Islamic world in Africa? Because there are huge differences between Africa and India. And then finally, to understand what is happening today, how do we need to understand slavery today? So this is the general structure. So what I'm going to do now is just going to go into this Malakut al-Manukum a little bit deeper and look at the individual words to see how people understand them. Just to see the people who have studied ancient Arabic, not MSM, not this the modern standard Arabic, this Al Jazeera MSA, no, but the Quranic Arabic. How did they understand it? Where does this come from? And this is what I'm going to do now, and then we can open it up. So the general term Mamalakut Aymanakum. Now we need to understand this is the general term. So this Mamalakut Aymanakum is not something that is specific to a specific person, but it is a group term. In other words, it's just like saying car, where a car can be anything. It can be a station wagon, it can be a BMW, it can be a Volkswagen or Volvo, whatever. So this is a very high-level descriptive term that is just a general thing. Now, changing this word doesn't make any difference, whatever you want to call it. So the general term is what your right hands possess. If there are scholars investigating slavery, those whom the right hands possess, and if this is translated into English, it almost always lacks the required critical thinking in its approach. So in other words, anybody who wants to change this and retranslate this lacks the required critical thinking. Now, if we go to the Encyclopedia of Islam, the Brill, and we go to volume 1, page 24, it says abd is the ordinary word for slave in Arabic of all periods, more particularly for male slave. Female slave is ama. On the other hand, the Quran frequently uses the term rakaba. Literally, this is the neck or nape of the neck. And still more frequently, the periphrasis, in other words, the higher term, Mamalakut Aymanakum, that which your right hand possesses. Now, this is the Encyclopedia of Islam. Okay, this is not me. I'm not saying this. These are the experts. Somebody who writes an encyclopedia of Islam, this is what they say. And then there's a shorter encyclopedia, the Mamluk. The term owes its origin, the term Mamluk, owes its origin probably to the current phrase of the Quran, Ma malakut aymanukum, what your right hand possesses, a general designation of slaves without specialization of gender. So this is what I think we need to take away from today, that there is an umbrella term which is used generally not for males or females. It doesn't only refer to sex slaves, it doesn't only refer to whatever, it's for different slaves. Dr. Abdul Latif from Al-Azhar, the second reason to take slaves is the sexual propagation of slaves, which would generate more slaves for the owner. And Ibn Taymiyyah wrote, the one who owns the mother also owns her children. Being the master of the mother makes him the owner of her children, whether they were born to a husband or they were illegitimate children. Therefore, the master has the right to have sexual intercourse with the daughters. Now get this, the master has the right to have sexual intercourse with the daughters of his female slave because they are the daughters of his property, provided he does not sleep with the mother at the same time. And this is in volume 35, page 54. And this is Ibn Taymiyyah, one of the greatest scholars. But I think, what's his name, Ahmed says, no, I know better than Ibn Taymiyyah. Umar, the second caliph, also committed what seems to be rape of a female slave. From Ibn Sa'd, volume 2, page 438. A slave girl passed by me who attracted me, and I cohabited with her while I was fasting. Just like that. Now, if we go and look at the words, and then this is, I think I don't know, there's so much material. If we go and look at the words, ma is whom. The malakat, the root is MLK, is to rule, command, or to control. In other words, to have power over, have authority over. It can also be king and kingdom, but it usually is more along the control than have power. And the aymanukum, the root is here, the YMN, is the right side, the oath, the lead to the right, or be the cause of a blessing, or simply prosperous, fortunate, or lucky. So, as always in Arabic, it's vague and ambiguous, so there's different things that you can interpret this as, but in general, it is being used as exactly what we have seen today. So the 45 whatever plus English translations of Ma malakut aymanukum, it's interpreted in different ways. But the general theme is that which is within one's ownership, control, rightfully owned, in other words, slaves or captured slaves. And in the context of 424, Ma malakut aymanukum refers to female slaves that are legally purchased, owned, or captured slaves within the control of the winners, thus lawful to have sex with without marriage. Oh, and then he goes, here's a detailed explanation. It refers to female captives of war, the women provided earlier when it wasn't big. And now, this is 19 different explanations of how this Ma malakut aymanukum is being used in the Quran, is being used in Islam. There are 19 different explanations. And then the guy says in the end, this is a Muslim, right? He says, I hope the points explained above will help understand how female captives of war should be treated and their rights in Islam. They are at par with the status of a wife in Islam, and in no way are they considered and treated as sex slaves, even though he's just given 19 points where they are. It doesn't matter. If anyone goes beyond these and commit excess, and there's an S missing, commits excess, like beating, raping, torturing, abusing, then such person will be held accountable, may be prosecuted, and Allah knows best. But he's just saying here, it is not permitted to allow any other man to get intimate with a female captive under one's guardianship. But we've seen in the Quran just now that yes, you can. You have to ask that slave's master if you are allowed to. So I don't know. And then now there's pages and pages of what happens in Sharia, and this is where I think we will leave it, and this is what we will do next week.
Just before you go, Stops, are you going to be covering the black slavery of Islamic history?
Yes, absolutely, because, and this is now the saddest part, if you go deeper into, I don't know if people are aware that in Google you have the general search, then you have the academic search, and then you have the scholar search. If you go a little bit deeper, you go and you suddenly find references of people, historians, who go and investigate the various sources of what is available. And mostly what we find, because there were Europeans involved in this, that we have some documents. We have very little when it comes to India, and even less when it comes to this, where the word actually comes from the Slavic people, where Muslims went north and just took slaves and brought them down south because they were garnering higher prices. So yes, I will, because the slave trade interfered with the progress of entire countries. And the Muslim slave trade interfered with the cross-Atlantic slave trade. Because well, I don't know if you want to call it, there were more men being exported across the Atlantic and more women into the Islamic countries. But this was only in the beginning, because then eventually the people from Southwest Africa were sent north, where the Muslims were, because the Muslims were in Morocco, Tunisia, Libya, Egypt, and so on. But they hadn't, and of course then Somalia and across the Horn of Africa along the coastline, but not so much in the southwestern parts like Nigeria. This was unaffected by this. So the Europeans started in the north and the Muslims started in the east. And then when they came together, now the Muslims became the slave traders, the blacks, because the blacks were converted into Muslims, and now these Muslims were enslaving their black brothers and were sending the men over to the Europeans to sell over to the Americas, and the women were taken to the east towards the Islamic countries. And there we have horrendous accounts. So you cannot ignore this. You have to go and refer to what was happening in the southwestern part of Africa, and how they were treating the people. I mean, the stories that I've come across, they're terrible. And this is why I find it so pathetic that people like Maverick, people like Ahmed, they're coming here and they're saying, well, it's not so bad, and actually the Islam never did this, and it has nothing. Islam has nothing to do with Islam, and this is sad. Why can't people be honest? Because I know that the Christians, I know that the Europeans have admitted, yes, this was shit. This was really, really terrible. And we apologize profusely for it. Yes, there was a lot of damage done. And I think people are starting to be honest about it. And I don't understand why Muslims can't do the same.
I think also as well, when you look at the African slave trade as well that Islam was involved in, it was considerably longer as well. I think the cross-Atlantic slave was about 200
and higher
years.
Volume. Yeah, higher volume and much longer. Yeah,
about 1400, well, no, not 1400, about 1300, 1200 years. So the amount of time that, and up until recently, we're talking about the last 50 years, we're only beginning to see Muslim authorities like Saudi Arabia condemn it or admit to it.
We're talking about 2007.
I said last 50 years, I was being generous. I know, the first account.
It's not even 15 years.
No, but the first account I heard, probably about 10 years ago, was back in about 1974. But like all things, statements are made. Sometimes they're not verified. So I've used that as my okay. Then I'll take the earliest date of apologetics. But no matter when it was, even if it was 50 years, it's still not good.
Yes.
2007, 1974. For me, I didn't want to be dogmatic about it because what difference does it make between, say, 40 years? It's still not good. But also with the
Correct.
black slave trade, there's something else. There's another connotation to it that tends to go amiss, and that's the racism that's involved as well. So it's not just about black, and not just about the slave trade. It is the deep-rooted racism that takes place within Islam, because that I can definitely vouch for, because I've seen that with my own eyes. How Arab and Asian Muslims have an utter contempt for black Muslims and African
And
Muslims.
and this is the weird thing. Why are the blacks sucking up to the Arabs? I don't
Well,
understand it.
when I grew up, one of the things I just found absolutely amazing was that how the Asians and the blacks tend to sort of like, well, we're against whitey, and brown skin's nearer the color of black skin. So if you side with us, it was almost like we'll make friends, and our cultures are very similar, and we have a similar outlook, and but we both hate white because they're just racist people. And the irony is, black people have more in common with white people than they actually do with brown people. You've only got to look at music as a prime example of that. Music is a fantastic example of how black and white people can come together and have produced probably the best music the planet's ever seen for the past 50 years.
Same with
Um,
sports.
and sports as well. Of course, sports entertainment, though sports entertainment and politics has been somewhat progressive, but music goes back a little bit longer than that when you consider ska music, Motown, and such things. But the irony as well, because I do have black friends, and I have one in particular. I'm going to name him after, just for the sake of expediency on the show, like South Africa, like an African animal. I'll call him Rhino, Little Rhino, because he has only a little horn, from what I've heard. And he doesn't eat pork. And my strong understanding is he doesn't eat pork because of the Islamic influence. And I've noticed that black culture as well, they tend to name their children with Muslim names, even though they're not Muslim. So I have to ask the question, if Islam doesn't influence black culture that much, why is it they don't eat pork? And why is it they give
Yeah.
names? And yet the irony, no religion hates black people more than Islam. It just baffles me. What I would like to do, I mean, I'm not touting another channel on YouTube, but the J Show, that's the channel name on YouTube, the J Show. There's a black woman on there. She did a couple of items about a year ago on slavery, and her name's Sarah Foster. And the stuff that you was just mentioning about looking at these scholarly works of black slavery historically, as far as Islam is concerned, she's actually done that. So for those who don't want to read the information, I strongly recommend you go on the J Show, look at the work that Sarah Foster has done and how she passes it over, because she only uses the historical texts. So if you're being a bit lazy, I recommend that you do that, because that's where I got most of my information from in recent years.
Well, great stuff. And guys, please, if you're a Muslim, try and be honest, because really, it is so sad to see people like Ahmed who are lying through their teeth, trying to make it look better. It is not. It is horrible. Don't try and make something that is so horrible. Try and make it better. The same thing with the rape story. The same thing with all the. Just accept it. It is there. It is part of your heritage. If you have decided to be a Muslim, if you have decided to believe this one thing, that there's this God and this is his book, then you need to take the contents of this book on board. You need to accept it. So don't lie. Don't fool yourself and don't deceive others, please. It's there. It's in the book. It is part of the Quran. You
But,
cannot change it.
but if they're not going to lie, they're not going to stay Muslim. That's the problem. If you're asking Muslims not to lie about their past, then they're not going to stay Muslim for much longer, are they? So you're asking them to leave Islam, basically.
Maverick stops talking about honesty. I'm not only talking about honesty, I'm talking about integrity, authenticity, about my own conscience, about being a decent human being. I think anybody can do that. Why can't you? Why do you have to lie? Why do you have to deceive others? Why do you have to pretend these things don't exist if they are so obviously there? And Thunder has made an excellent point today showing how over history this has been understood. And only now you come along and you say, no, 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 this is all different. You cannot do that.
And
You cannot change history.
I think when we look at the historical context in Islamic parlance of what hypocrite is, I think we can honestly say that Maverick must be a hypocrite.
Yeah, of course. I mean,
And also,
what,
Maverick, if you're listening to the show, can you just type? I'm running out of names to call myself every Friday. If you've got a new name for me,
Thunderstruck.
Thunderstruck. Okay, then that's next week's name. Then Thunderstruck.
And I mean, look, Mavericks, he says to me, why don't you start with stop lying? I am quoting the Quran. I am quoting Islamic scholars. I'm quoting sheikhs. What do you want me to do? I cannot stop telling the truth. I cannot go and say, no, actually, I can have sex with my wives and I can have sex with those who are already married. How can I have sex with somebody who is married? How is that possible? How can the Quran tell me I am not allowed to marry anybody, have sex with anybody who is married, except I can with some of them? Now, how do you classify this? Why am I lying if this is what the Quran says? Don't you understand this? Why can you accuse me of lying when all I'm doing is I'm quoting the Quran? This is... When can we expect you back on G Block causing hell? Well, I was there today for a couple of minutes, but the thing is that they shout over each other and that's it. So there's, it's not that interesting. If you have people shouting at each other and then I have very little to contribute. So I'll come on now and then, but where does the Quran say master? You said, ask the master of slaves. Where is that? I showed you. I gave you the references. I don't need to look it up again. I gave you everything. I'm open with my sources. And you can go to my blog. I put everything on my blog. Okay, I haven't updated it, but it should say there. So you can read everything up that I'm doing. Because I'm being totally transparent with what I'm doing. I don't need to hide anything. I'm just quoting the Quran. I'm just analyzing it. I'm researching, doing my bit, and then just analyzing it. That's all I'm doing. Okay. Maverick has been refuted and claim about the inheritance error. So is yes. Thank you, Rob.
Have you noticed with Islam as well? It's every time that you're quoting Islam and we're bringing something up about how bad it is, whether it's inheritance or whether it's slavery or whether it's racism, whatever the theme is, it's always down to how it's been interpreted from the Arabic words and such. And yet all the other stuff is never sort of like challenged about what it means.
Yeah, it is.
And something. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, but this is the point. Thank you. I just want to put this. Ahmed has been schooled on this because he came with the inheritance error. He tried to pull the same trick. But then we went and we showed him, look, this is what the grammar says. These are the grammatical rules. What you are doing is you're lying. This is the source. This is you have to add an S if it belongs to somebody, all right? This is the way that the grammar works. And in Arabic grammar, it works like this. You get certain words which are group words. And so these are not, if you say, if you have a child, this does not mean that you have one male child only. And he has been schooled on this and he will not admit it. He will continue lying and he will not admit that he was wrong. So now he knows he is wrong. He knows that what he is saying is not correct, but he will still say it. Now we're showing him, Amalakud Amanukum means exactly this. I have given you the definition. I have given you the dictionary. I have given you examples. I have given you how it is being used. And he will still lie. And then he tells me I am lying. I'm not embarrassing myself. Ahmed, you are the one who was embarrassed and you're still lying about it. I don't understand why. We've given it to you black and white. We've given you the grammar rules. We've given you the entire history of how this works and where this comes from and how this is being used in the grammatical context of Arabic and in classical Arabic. And you still tell me that I'm embarrassing myself if you lie to others and you've been exposed as lying? It's unbelievable. This is what Islam does to a normal human being. It makes you a liar. It makes you a blabbering fool.
Not normal human being. It does it to all human beings that profess Islam and those like CNN and Fox News are scared of Islam.
Mark Twain says it's easier to fool somebody than to convince them they have been fooled. And this is the point. He has been fooled, but now it's very difficult to convince him that he has been fooled. He will just continue like this. He will embarrass himself. He will be the laughing stock of everybody, and he will continue lying because he knows he's wrong and he's lying. But he will not change it.
What's the proof?
Okay, I have a hadith of the week for today. Sorry, Thunder, what?
No, I was just reading something that Maverick put on the side notes, but it doesn't matter. We can see him, speak to him next week.
Okay. Then all that remains to be done is, because we're late already, is the hadith of the week, which actually I have to admit I stole from Introverted Smiles. So I did not find this because this is Corona related. And I just happened to bump into this. So thank you, Introverted Smiles. It's from Sahih Bukhari in book 29. It's hadith number 14. It's one of the medical things. And it's narrated by our friend Abu Huraira. Allah's messenger said, "There are angels guarding the entrances of Medina. Neither the plague nor the Dajjal will be able to enter it." So the angels guarding the entrance of Medina have failed because the coronavirus has entered Medina. So your God has failed because you put the wrong angels there, knowing that they will fail because he's all-knowing, he's all-powerful. So he could have known that the angels are going to fail, and he could have changed this because he's all-powerful to put angels there who are capable of stopping the virus, and didn't.
Yeah, but then they'll just argue, well, a plague's not a virus.
The plague is a virus, of course.
I know, but it's just a play on words. Plague and virus are two separate things. And you look at the etymology, and you have to look at the root word, and you have to look at the historical context. And
of course, it's a test. Yeah. Guys, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. I've been talking far too much, but there is so much stuff. It is amazing how much material there is once you start digging. Now, this is one of the things that has been kept very quiet. The slavery thing in Islam is somehow a taboo topic. You're not allowed to say this because then you're a Islamophobe and all sorts of things. All because you are looking at history and you're looking at the facts. But there is so much stuff, you just need to dig it out. Thank you very much, guys, in the chat. Thank you for your help. Thank you for being there. Thank you, Ahmed, for showing what actually is wrong with Islam and what it does to a human being. Thank you, guys. See you next Friday. Bye.
Thunderbird? What? Someone's calling me Thunderbird. Who?
Thunderbird.
Who's reanimated? How dare you, sir? Thunderbird.
Okay, and yeah, if anybody, I forgot to put the link of the Discord chat. Let's go there for 2 minutes. I don't know if I'm going to be there long. I'm going to put this into Facebook and YouTube, so nobody has an excuse. So if you still want to join us for a couple of minutes, if there's anything you want to exchange, here you go. Facebook is there. YouTube is there. There's the link if you want to go to the Discord server. I'll be there in a couple of minutes. See you then. See you next week. Good night. Bye everybody. Thank you. And if you liked just give it. There's only 2 likes. Give us some more likes. Thank you.